Hey, happy Wednesday morning, everyone, and welcome back to Morning Musings. Well, as promised, this morning, as we continue our study of the Olivet Discourse, attempting to set the proper context so that we properly understand what the disciples were asking about and therefore what Jesus was talking about in response to their questions. The claim is so often made, as I shared with you yesterday, that when the disciples asked, "Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" the disciples were confused. They were ignorant. They were wrong. They incorrectly linked Jesus' coming with the fall of Jerusalem. And everyone knows Jesus didn't come in AD 70. I mean, after all, that's what Kim Riddlebarger tells us. So very clear, and by the way, it clearly wasn't the end of the age, according to Mr. Riddlebarger. False claims, false assumptions. So, once again, the argument is made, look, how many times in Jesus' ministry were the disciples completely ignorant? How many times did Jesus chide his own apostles for not understanding? Well, there's no question about this. But here's what we have. Those who claim that the apostles were confused, ignorant, wrong, in Matthew chapter 24, are guilty of illegitimate totality transfer. Now, what that means is, you go to a text over here that says something, and you impose that view on this passage over here. In other words, in Matthew 13, Mark chapter 2, Jesus told the parable of the wheat and the tares and the seed being sown, Mark chapter 4, wheat and tares, Matthew chapter 13. After telling the parables, the disciples come to Jesus and said, Jesus, tell us what this parable means. And Jesus said, if you don't understand this, how are you going to understand the mysteries of the kingdom? They clearly didn't understand. Jesus is upset with them. How do we know? Hang on to that question. In John chapter 2, when Jesus, standing in the temple, said, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up again," the disciples didn't have a clue what he was talking about. It's real obvious the Jews didn't have a clue what he was talking about. They thought he was talking about the physical temple. But after his resurrection, they understood. Ignorance, later knowledge, later understanding. In John chapter 6, Jesus had just fed the multitudes with just a few loaves, just a few fishes. They all got on a boat. They're out in the middle of the ocean, of the Sea of Galilee. And Jesus turns to his disciples and says, "Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees." The disciples start kind of looking at each other. We didn't know the disciples had bread. What does Jesus mean by the leaven of the Pharisees? What in the world is he talking about? And Jesus chides them. He ridicules them for not understanding. Do you not understand? I'm talking about the doctrine of the Pharisees. And in Matthew 17, Matthew 21, Matthew 22, Jesus started predicting his death, his burial, and his resurrection. And over and over and over again, we are told they did not understand. In John chapter 14, Jesus said, "I'm going away so that I may come again and receive you to myself." And the disciples are looking around at one another and they go, "Well, where's he going?" And you know, Lord, show us the Father. And you could just almost imagine Jesus, palm planting on his face. And he says, have I been so long with you that you do not understand? If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Okay, we could go on. There are many examples during the ministry of Jesus in which the disciples clearly did not understand what Jesus was saying. But I want to share two quick facts with you. Point number one, the question is, in all of those passages, in all of those examples in which we know that the disciples did not understand, how do we know? We know because the Bible tells us so. In John 6, beware the leaven of the Pharisees. Do you not understand? I'm talking about the doctrine. John 14, have I been so long with you that you do not understand? If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. When talking about his death, burial, resurrection, they didn't understand, and he said, the Son of Man will go into Jerusalem, there he will die, and on the third day he will rise again. So again, the clear, indisputable point is, in every passage that we know of, that Jesus, or that the disciples were confused, they were ignorant, they were wrong, we know it, and we only know it because the Bible says so. But here's an absolutely remarkable fact. Nowhere in the Olivet Discourse does Jesus ever say, do you understand? Nowhere does he ever say, why don't you understand? Nowhere does it say, after his resurrection, they understood. There is not one syllable of a statement in Matthew chapter 24 that tells, that communicates, that conveys the idea in any way, shape, form, or fashion that the disciples were ignorant, confused, or wrong. Not one word. Well, folks, in order to prove that the disciples were ignorant, confused, or wrong, you've got to be able to produce the evidence. And it's not enough to say, well, very clearly they were wrong, very clearly they were confused, because after all, Jesus didn't come, and AD 70 was not the end of the age. As Kim Riddlebarger says, that's a priori presumptive theology. It is not based on exegesis. It is saying, well, I know what the end of the age is. It's the end of the Christian age. I know what the coming of the Lord is. It's Jesus coming out of heaven as a 5'5" Jewish man riding on a literal cloud. And I know that didn't happen in AD 70. Therefore, the disciples were wrong. Folks, that's not exegesis. That is an abuse of hermeneutic. And it is a total abuse of logic. And oh, by the way, as I suggested yesterday, we have Jesus teaching about his coming at the end of the age, making a very specific application of it, asking his disciples if they understood, and they said yes. I developed that extensively in this book. We shall meet him in the air, the wedding of the King of Kings. I won't be able to share everything with you in tomorrow's video, so please get yourself a copy of this book. We shall meet him in the air, the wedding of the King of Kings. Go to my website, donkpreston.com, bibleprophecy.com, and order the book and send me a note that says you saw the offer on YouTube or Facebook. And as I've suggested to you, you will be blown away with how clear, how emphatic, how specific, how undeniable the evidence is. How clearly the disciples expressed their understanding of Jesus' coming and the end of the age within a very specific prophetic context, and it was not a literal, visible, physical coming of Jesus, and it was not the end of the Christian age. So yeah, You don't want to miss it. I'll see you on the flip side.